Hello, Martial Arts Journey Tribe, and as always, let me try to get this guy to say hi to you. Can you see him? I don't know if you see him. You're gonna see him for a little more than there you go. Don't you? Both of them. There. He's a bit covered today. I guess he's shy, but he said hi, so we're good to go. So today we have going to have a very interesting discussion. The thing is, many people believe that martial arts that are taught in the military must be top-notch, battle-tested, because it's the military and they have real combat experience. Now, the thing is, I heard on multiple occasions that it's not that simple. And in fact, I heard rumors, at least, that many military programs actually teach martial arts which are not functional. Now, I can't say that as a fact, but I heard that enough times to become very curious. And that's why when I saw the article by Ryan Noordally named, the article that he wrote is named "The British Army Has a Black Belt in Bullshido," I became very curious because that was covering one of those subjects that I just introduced to you about. But it's one of those subjects where I have this kind of opinion in the back of my mind, but I don't have any clarity. I miss information. That's not my background. And usually those subjects are the ones where I'm like, I really want to know more. And also I find that many people are not eager to speak about controversial subjects. And when I saw that Ryan is down to do that, I'm like, yes, we have to have a talk. So Ryan himself, just to say a few words about him, he has been a part of the British Army for more than a decade, and he's currently serving there as a senior non-commissioned officer in the Royal Artillery. He also had a brief experience as part of the French Foreign Legion, studied various martial arts for most of his life. He first started with traditional martial arts and then gained experience in combat sports, and currently also is training some BJJ, which is always cool. We'll have Ryan join us in a moment, but before I do that, I just wanted to remind you all that stay until the very end, because at the second half of the talk, we're going to answer your live chat questions. So it's going to be a blast. And now, without further ado, I'll invite Ryan here, and let's get this journey started. So, hello, Ryan.
Good evening, Rockers.
So it's really, really great to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm really good. I just got my COVID vaccine, and so far so good. I'll tell you about later if I feel all right.
Cool. And I always like to start by asking this simple question. So if somebody asks you about, and I guess this is a bit more complicated because you both have a martial arts background and a military background, which are both relevant at this case. So if you would describe, let's say, both your martial arts / military journey briefly, how would you do that?
Wow. So it's weird because like one did get in the way of the other, but at the same time, they are they're linked basically. What I was looking in martial arts, and especially in traditional martial arts, were first and foremost values, which I also found in the army. So yeah, the whole thing of discipline, etiquette, tradition is something that you find in traditional martial arts, and you'll have that in the army as well. However, in terms of practice, the military life pretty much gets in the way of being a regular practitioner of martial arts. It is very hard to just have like regular attendance of martial arts classes when you have to deploy, when you go on exercise, go on courses, etc. I probably spent, if I put them back to back, more than 3 months of a year that is away from home. And of course, when I will be on holiday, I would rather spend that time with my family than, yeah. So this is it. So it's like a dotted line, all right. So I've got my military life, which is like kind of a continuous line, and when it stops, I've got like martial arts practice. But yeah, I started with Aikido basically, but that was when I was a student, but I stopped Aikido because I joined the Legion. So
Okay.
there you go. So this is where my first stop in my martial arts journey, basically.
Mm.
And then after the Legion, I became a teacher. This is when I started taking Hungar Kung Fu,
Mm.
which I managed to do during like 3 years. And then I joined the British Army, and there was a stop again. And I only like recently took like boxing basically for the regiment, which is quite interesting the way it's actually done in the British Army. But I might talk about that a little bit later, because it will tell you a lot about the way the British Army handles hand-to-hand training, or more like the culture of combat, basically of hand-to-hand combat, is
Mm.
quite particular.
Mm. Yeah, well, I'm sure, as you kind of gave us a hint, there's like this whole podcast could be like about your journey and about the military and about your experience. And since we don't have the luxury to go into details, just hearing briefly about your journey, it's really interesting to hear that, and it makes sense that you don't have that luxury of training martial arts in the military, which is kind of almost counterintuitive, because when like a regular civilian like myself who does not know much about the army, when people like myself think about the army, we imagine Navy SEALs training hand-to-hand combat, doing all these fancy judo throws and being badasses with a firearm or without. But it doesn't seem like that's happening. And again, it's kind of counterintuitive, because it seems like, oh, you should be given like plenty of opportunities to train that. But also there are other questions there, like do the military really need hand-to-hand combat altogether? But that's a different subject we'll still cover.
Well,
Yeah.
this is. I think it's the heart of the question, because if you answer that one, you explained a lot of you will answer a lot of your questions. So let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
So first of all, the prime weapon of a soldier is a firearm.
Mm.
That is usually sighted for ranges of 300 meters to 100 meters. This is the primary range of an individual. Then again, at small unit level, they will carry a machine gun, for instance, and that machine gun is pretty much accurate to 600 meters or more. So this is the range, the combat range, basically, of a group of 4 to 8 men, and women, by the way.
Right.
So this this tells you that how. So the probability of like hand to hand coming into play would be quite reduced, but I'm going to come back to that.
Yeah.
Now I am in the artillery. The artillery, we're talking about ranges of 15 to 70 kilometers. These are the ranges where I, actually help kill other people and break things. This is it. This is my range. And the artillery, for instance, has accounted for 75% of the casualties during both world wars.
Wow.
So most of the guys who got killed or injured were killed by people who never saw them. They were just points plotted on a map. They might have been observed. That's a different thing. But this is death in war is often anonymous. And even in recent years, even though artillery was not that prevalent, we did use air power, but our enemies didn't. I'm talking about the war on terror. But it was very distant, remote, because of like things like IEDs, for instance. They were, planted in place, etc. But at the same time, they were very close to. Well, the people who have been to Iraq will tell you that there were a lot of instances of street fighting. So now, considering also that the world population in general is getting more and more urbanized, there's a strong likelihood that we will be fighting at very close and closer ranges. And in these cases, yeah, it does become relevant. the British Army was actually in Iraq and in Afghanistan, actually, still using bayonets. I knew people who actually did bayonet charges across cornfields in Afghanistan. So it's is it relevant? Can it happen? Yes. Is there a likelihood that it will happen more often? Maybe. But then again, as I said, ground combat forces account for about 1 out of 8 soldiers in armies. The people who actually fight, the infantry and the armored corps, but even the armored corps, they usually fight from vehicles. But the infantry account for 1/8 to 1/7 of the total of armies, and the rest of it is either support or or services. Do they need to learn to fight hand to hand? Well, I think the answer is quite complicated, because I think it's on a case to case basis, and if I tap into my own experience, I can give you examples of how different martial arts are suited to different situations, and how they're taught in armed forces for specific purposes. But effectiveness is not always the prime criteria. Sometimes armies basically teach things that they're comfortable with, things that are culturally ingrained in their traditions, rather than something that would be effective.
Yeah. I guess I wonder if that will be in a way related to one of my following questions. So I guess I did mention the beginning of our talk, but then some people just jump in and jump out. So one of the main reasons that inspired me to talk with you on live record is because you wrote an article which went viral, which is the British Army has a black belt in Bullshido. So what inspired you specifically to write that article? Like what happened that you were like, oh, I need to write this?
It was it was your channel, actually. So but generally this is how it started. It started with funny videos about Bullshido with a D that I could watch on YouTube, and it was funny. But I stumbled onto one of your videos, and I really liked the way you broke down problems, and you had a very open-minded approach, a humble approach towards your training. Basically, you looked at what you had been doing for so long, and you basically applied critical thinking to it. Now, the article I've written was about military training, not martial arts training. So it's about the way we train on exercise, the way we set up exercise, and how linear it is, how we train doing within our comfort zone, and how we don't question the way we train. So I drew a parallel between the way we train in traditional martial arts and what I think is the way we should train, which is more like a sparring with a free thinking, what we call up for or red for opposing forces, the people playing the bad guys, and that was the at the heart of my article. There is another article, however, on the Wilver Room by someone else, a guy named Chris, who highlighted, however, that the British Army needs a combative system, because guess what? We don't have one at all.
So what's the hand-to-hand training then in the British Army?
There's none.
None, not at all.
No, not in the British Army. So the Royal Marines, the Royal Marines, but who are not the army, but kind of like part of the Navy, basically. They have a fighting method, but It is dated back to the close quarter battle system set in place during World War II by Fairbairn and Sykes, who were policemen in Shanghai in the 1930s. So is it relevant? I'm not too sure. You would need to ask Royal Marines themselves, because I'm pretty sure some of them would be doing that in their jobs, but will also be training in something else in their private lives, and they would be, I think, they would be more than happy to actually talk about it. The only kind of hand-to-hand combat we train in, and the aim is not to train combat, is bayonet training. And we don't fight with bayonet training. We don't learn to fence with it or anything like that. It's basically an exercise to train or to test aggression. So basically, you get what we call beasted. Let's say it put into a state of physical exertion and heightened stress during the day through various physically demanding exercises, and also the instructors will put pressure on you, by constantly shouting at you, etc. Military style, basically. But it's for a reason. There's a rationale behind it, and then they just test your aggression by putting you on what we call the bayonet range. So they test your aggression and whether you can switch that on or not.
So I guess, so there's some sort of training, but how would you, so what would you say is missing in that system? Like, so
But
they're
you
testing your
don't train.
aggression.
You don't train. You don't train to attack or to defend. You don't learn anything. You're not getting pitted against someone who will literally have some kind of force on force or even resist you. It is you being taught to scream your guts out and go at a sandbag. Sometimes it can be filled with, like, I don't know, some pork or mutton guts, and you basically, they test you whether you will actually go at it like you mean it or not. This is it. This is the test. That's it. Well, eventually, sometimes they make you do like a little bit of a course, so you end up like crawling through flooded tunnels and everything, and they throw a dummy into the water, and you're there with your bayonet in your hand and just have to stab the thing like you mean it, like you want to kill a guy. That's the point. But that's it. You are not taught how to handle a knife. You're not taught how to defend against one. You're not trained to face a guy out of ammunition waving a rifle at you in a closed room, for instance.
So why do you think, what are the main reasons that these elements are missing?
Well, this is the point. This is where we go back to my article. As an organization, I think, well, armies in general, as organizations, are very conservative. And although they claim they want to be effective, more than often, they will set up standards that are quite arbitrary and that have been decided by people who, because of the hierarchical nature of the organization, are never questioned. And this is where we go back to the article I've written again about, how traditional martial arts, for instance, the sensei is rarely questioned because of the aura of respect attached to him.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I kind of wanted to get back to and quickly mention, well, first of all, it's really cool to hear that and to know that my stuff inspired your article. That's really cool to know that influence is expanding, because it's impossible to cover all realms, and I'm not the person experienced in the military, but to hear that you got some inspiration and then you went into your field, that's really cool. You were about to say something?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So but aside from that, when I asked you about that inspiration of what inspired you, Was there any situation, because usually there's something, there has to be some frustration, which is built up because you constantly see something like I'm a good case of that. I've spent so many years in Aikido. I feel like I've been lied to, and there's so much pent up frustration that I'm like, I need to talk about this. I'm going to go mad. So I wonder if there was something for you, either visual or experiential. Yeah.
So to write my article about the way the army trains to cope with actual war fighting situation. So I've been working a lot because I'm specialized in signals in the artillery. So I've worked a lot in headquarters, but I mean headquarters on exercise, which basically are where whoever commands what we call the battle group or a brigade. Basically, this is where everything happens. This is where they decide where everyone goes, who does what. So I had that kind of like bird's eye view of what was happening. And I think I was on an exercise in Kenya, and they had 2 regiments there, 2 battalions actually, 2 battalions there, and they took turn in being the enemy. So one was exercising, the other one was playing the enemy, and they swapped around. And it was supposed to be a free thinking enemy, and I was there like dead excited, like at last, and it wasn't that. It ended up like basically being the same old thing that I had been doing for 10 years. I've been in the army now, and from what I've heard from people who have been in for longer, has always been happening. You have a scenario which is linear and which very much looks like choreographed traditional martial arts. You go through moves. You are first meant to block or delay the enemy, then go on the counterattack, and then eventually you take an objective and it stops. So that everyone can like see and it goes on again. And it goes on again like further basically. So you go around the map. That's what I'm around the training area. And even though at a lower tactical level, the enemy is actually free. Yeah. So they're actually looking for you. They are trying, but in the end, you have basically what we call the observer mentors, who are actually like the umpires, the referees of this little match. They are telling the opposing forces what to do. Which means everything is actually choreographed, regardless of whether you have like supposedly free thinking. It's not what's happening. Everything is scripted, everything is choreographed, and the script itself is linear. It's not like you arrive into a situation and what if the outcome is A, you have so many possibilities or courses of action. No, it's regardless of whether you do this or not, you will move on to the next stage regardless.
So I wonder, because again, my main reference point of it all is martial arts, but I think you acknowledge that there is some similarity between the way martial arts is structured and the way, especially like the hierarchical martial arts. So I'm wondering about this thing that in martial arts, especially the traditional martial arts or martial arts which lack the pressure testing element, often there isn't an understanding in the higher ranks, like the leader, the main sensei, the dojo cho, whatever. They don't really understand that difference between choreographed and training where you help out each other, you don't resist, there's no aliveness. They think, and they were taught beforehand, that that's going to work. And then whenever you're going to experience what people like to call the street situation, instincts are just going to kick in and you're just going to defend yourself. So they believe that they're teaching the right thing. Although, I'm a big advocate that that's not the way it is. So I'm curious, do you think there's that belief in the military as well, that actually this is sufficient, or there's an awareness that this is not really working, but because of that structure, the hierarchy, and the conservative?
Yeah, but Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And this is another parallel that you can draw between military training and the. So let's say you drill into perfecting the moves, because this is
Mm,
what we are doing at the minute. So we have written something that is called doctrine. So a set basically of beliefs that we hold, and we think that the best practice, well, the standard operating procedures, are ought to be like this. If we want to win, we need to do this, this, this. This is written beforehand, usually drawing from past operations,
mm,
which in itself is a bit of a problem because, like, it's good to draw on previous operations, but sometimes that experience becomes outdated, especially if your new adversary is completely different from the previous one.
mm,
That's the first problem. The second problem being like you're always on the back foot, and there's actually a third one. Well, which leads on to something else, is that the best way to actually write doctrine would be to test it, to pressure test it before writing
mm,
it,
mm,
which is what I kind of advocated for in my article, which is not what's happening.
mm.
But going back to what you said about the yeah, I mean, you're from the Baltic countries, aren't you?
Yeah.
So let's take your big neighbor and former occupying power, for instance.
Mm,
We know for a fact that if you had to compare him with a fighter, he would be a bar brawler.
mm,
He would be throwing some wild punches everywhere.
mm,
Are you going to pit a Tai Chi master against a guy like that? A guy that has perfected the moves for ages, that absolutely masters them, that looks really nice in a dojo or on a mat. Are you going to pit that guy against your bar brawler?
yeah, well, definitely not me, is when I know the way it
But
would work out. Yeah.
this is my issue at the minute.
Mm,
For the military, this is my issue. Unless there is a shift in the way we train, um, we are going to turn into an Aikido practitioner who has perfected the moves, etc. Now, the thing is, like, and you'll agree with me. I mean, I did Aikido for also the the spiritual side of it. I gained a lot from Aikido, um, and I always kind of knew that it wasn't that effective. Although, yeah, I was still far from the actual truth. But I mean, I knew there were more effective fighting methods. But uh, if you practice like a traditional martial art for the sake of doing it, because you like all these things, perfecting the the move, the forms, um, spiritual enlightenment, that's really great, and I'm on board with that. I completely understand that. However, the whole problem arises from believing that training in such a way, training to perfect the move, will help you cope with situations that are completely unpredictable
mm,
and evolving really fast.
mhm.
It's the relevancy of what you train in versus if you train perfectly into the perfect move that you will never use, why train?
Mhm. Yeah. I guess that also brings me up to ask, uh, when you're speaking, I know that our primary topic is the hand-to-hand combat, the martial arts training in the military, but it almost seems to me like you're not talking only about that, and I'm wondering if my hunch is right or not. So does that same issue, would you say, also touches other types of other levels and areas of training in the military, or does that mainly apply to the hand-to-hand?
No, it applies. I was mainly my article was mainly in when I'm saying combat training, it's combat in the large sense.
Mm,
It's
okay.
I'm talking a brigade against a brigade, or that's a kind of combat involving 1,000+ people.
Okay.
And when I'm talking about exercise, this is what I'm talking about. It's, you know, a bunch of guys in a training area in their vehicles, acting as if they were in a war or in an operation, and this is how it goes. And as I said, like we are perfecting the moves, but there you go.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess this the principles of pressure testing and basically lacking that pressure testing, focusing too much on tradition. So I guess it transcends many areas, and the whole military can be an example of that, from as far as I can see now.
Yeah, but this is where like being conservative about things like that is actually defeating the purpose. If you're looking for effectiveness, I think you have to keep an open mind, and you have to be open to evolution. And I think that kind of like irrational attachment to traditions is what got us stuck as an army with bayonet training instead of coming up with a combative system.
Yeah.
As an army, I mean, we in my opinion, we are kind of lagging behind other armies. And now I had my experience of the French army basically to compare with, and I think the French are doing it all right to a certain degree. And then again, you have the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marines who have come up with great combative systems now, and I think they train seriously into them, where they have like instructor levels and things like that. They actually set up something that is both effective per se, but also in what it teaches is, you know, to create space or look for opportunity. They're not training you to learn a technique by heart and to perfect it, and saying like, when when A happens, you will do B, and that will work. This is not what it teaches you. It teaches you like, all right, you know, your adversary will be doing this, this, and that. You can do all sorts of things, but the main principle is that you have to create that space. You have to look for that opportunity. You have to check your breathing, etc., etc. Seize the initiative. You know, it's that. It's broad principles, and it's great. It's something that, for instance, like when I started BJJ, I thought, wow, this is amazing. This martial art is, without a shadow of doubt, the smartest sport you can do after chess. I mean, when you're fighting a guy, there is so much. Of course, like instinct is kicking in. You're completely out of breath. Well, that's if you're not being choked, actually choked. But you would think that you don't have time to think, but you do. You do. You have like little moments of like clarity when you see that opening, or you don't. But it's actually there, and there's a lot of it's thinking art.
Well, when I think about BJJ and one of the commonalities between combat sports in general, it's usually because there's competition. And the opposite is true in most traditional martial arts, which suffer from a bad reputation of lack of pressure testing. You know, Aikido is infamous for not having competition besides Tomiki Aikido. There's Tai Chi as well, for example. And so there's that idea that the competition is one of the reasons why there's constant pressure testing, because you know you're going to compete, or that's part of the curriculum. So you need to perfect your game, and you constantly pressure test it. Also, I released recently a video. Again, I don't know if you've seen it, but you didn't have to. But there's the video about, was I wrong about Aikido, where I came to a conclusion that some
I've seen that one.
Right. And at the end of it, I come to that conclusion where about the bouncers, where most of the Aikido people, like functional Aikido people online on YouTube, they actually bouncers. So in a way, they're pressure testing their Aikido system even without doing it in the dojo, because they're constantly in that quote unquote battle or combat environment. So what I'm meaning to ask is, I wonder, would you say that one of the reasons it became so static, the situation that you described, is because there's none of that challenge, and there's no constant pressure testing where you're faced with, okay, this is not working, and you're forced to change, or is it actually happening, but there's not enough awareness to realize what's happening?
So, how would I break this down? Yeah, it's a lack of pressure testing. And to me, basically, as I said, like the units playing what we call the up four on exercise, playing the bad guys, are not given enough leeway to tackle the exercising troops. Not enough freedom. And basically, because of that, there is no pressure testing. As I said, everything is choreographed and scripted. But also, what I would say is that I would not only would I give those guys like a freedom of movement and action, but I would also try to train with foreign allied nations. And the reason for that is that when MMA appeared, or Vale Tudo, or wherever in the different countries where it actually sprung in the late 60s, early 70s, it kind of enabled us to see within basically the certain rules and competition that had been put in place, aka one-on-one and not against multiple adversaries and whatnot. But I mean, it still enabled us to actually identify what worked and what didn't. And eventually, some fighting methods emerge as the best way to train to actually submit or knock out an opponent if you could do virtually anything to him, apart from eye gouging, biting, and so these things were identified. I think that this came from confronting different martial arts. So on the one hand, you've got like Aikidokas confronting their practice with drunken, disorderly people, which is a form of pressure testing, and the pressure testing. But at the same time, so they are kind of like validating their martial art, but unless they confront it to other martial artists from a completely different culture, it won't work. Now, the problem with war is that more often than not, you go to war against somebody who has a completely different war culture. Well, except for the two world wars, which were mainly like between Europeans first, or at least European trained armies. But yeah.
So I guess, so you kind of described the training scenario, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting for me to kind of observe how it's, despite me having little knowledge about military, I can really kind of perceive the problem, because there's so many parallels between martial arts and what's happening in the military that you described. But you also, right now, you mostly spoke about the training environment. So hypothetically speaking, if, let's say, there was constant battle, constant combat, the units would be sent to war areas all the time, do you think that would change it naturally, or do you think that same struggle would happen of lack of change?
So as an army, the British Army is really good at adapting those kind of situations. It usually starts a war and gets absolutely battered, and somehow manages to get back into the fight and learn. And actually, this is what most armies do, to be honest. The problem with that is the number of lives you lose by working this way. So learning by failure works. However, if we could learn by failure in training rather than in wars, we would spare a lot of lives.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I'm looking at the parallels between martial arts and now the military, and I think there's a very big difference in scale on what's happening when there's losing lives and losing your sense of ego. But I think there is again that parallel where if some, let's say, for a lack of a better choice for the moment, like let's say an Aikido guy, they're training martial arts, they're training Aikido all the time, and then eventually after 10 years or 20 years, they get exposed to a BJJ person or like an MMA guy, they get destroyed, and it's an eye-opening, very painful experience, and then they're forced to change, and it's like, well, it would have been much better if you would have exposed yourself gradually to that through training. So I guess there's that parallel, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly that. Point to know the metaphor of the Aikido guy getting absolutely battered by the MMA guy. Um, that was me at some point.
Oh, okay.
It did happen to me, and it was an eye opener, especially since me and that guy we became friends, um, uh, and it was an eye opener. But at the same time, in my martial journey, and this is why I kind of clicked onto your channel, because everything that you said was very similar to what I experienced. I mean, the first time I experienced like an unprovoked attack in the street. I was literally going back to my place. This guy comes talking to me, asking for a cigarette lighter. I didn't smoke, and out of nowhere he pulls out some pepper spray and starts pepper spraying me in the face and tries to kick me. And I'm there, my eyes stinging. I can't do anything. I'm there, like thinking, am I trying like Kiruminage? No, maybe EQ. Let's run.
Mm.
And which was the right thing to do. And then when I was in the Legion in training, there was a lot of testosterone involved. These guys were hard guys. A fair few of them had done a stint in Eastern European Russian prisons, and that's in the late 90s. So basically, they knew how to handle themselves. But this guy was just another level. So it was this crazy French dude who had spent 13 months in Shaolin learning Sanda. He had actually prize fighted in Thailand. Well, because it was an illegal fight. It was like just on the other side of the border in Cambodia. Basically, yeah. And we had an argument, and he just busted my nose. And we became friends. But after that, we spent a lot of time chatting, me and him, talking precisely about martial arts. And he had like this proper experience. He had fought. And for all my 5 years of Aikido, I never had. I had practiced. And that's all, with people who were doing predetermined moves and things like that. But I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't say what made something effective and what made something not work. But I realized some things do work and some things don't. And this is when I realized, yeah, it's about pressure testing, but not only pressure testing, but confronting yourselves to something different. To different martial arts, to trying different things, and as I said, pressure testing, actually fighting in competitions or not. What's interesting in the British Army, we were saying that it's not we don't have any combative system. But the thing is, like, I would tell you that most of the guys I work with or who work under me, they know how to handle themselves because of the demographic. And I'm talking about the guys and girls, by the way, because of the demographics. They come from, working class backgrounds and some of the roughest areas of the country. They have been confronted to violence for most of their lives. That's the majority of them. They will know how to handle themselves. most of them will have some kind of fighting background also. And when I'm saying fighting, it's actually fighting. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think the British Army is counting on that, which is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. It's like, that I was about to say something else, but you just brought a point in me that I think that happens in traditional martial arts as well. When a very athletic person comes in, like a rugby player comes to like Aikido, or there's that same case of Lenny Sly, who's like a huge bodybuilder,
Yeah.
very, like, his arms are bigger than people's thighs. And so you get those big guys, strong guys who had real fighting experience, and then they come to Aikido and everyone's looking at them and they're like, oh, or like Aikido, Tai Chi, whatever, traditional martial arts, and everyone's like, oh, look at these guys, they're proof that this works. But actually, the reason their stuff works is not because of the training methodology they experienced in the dojo. It's because of the other experience, but people mash it up all together. So it sounds a bit similar, right?
Yeah. I've seen that as well in the in dojos, like big guys. But I mean, you had the cooperative big guy and you had the non-cooperative big guy, and more often than not, the non-cooperative big guy could show you how hard it is to actually set your technique in motion if the guy actually didn't want to cooperate and if he was like stronger than you. And for all this talk of like, yeah, Aikido is about like, getting your adversary's strength and like turning him against him. Yeah, sure, it works when the guy is kind of like helping you out a bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember having those big guys, and back in the day, I was frustrated. I was like, they're resisting me, and I would take the challenge, but I was frustrated. And now I realize actually I should have been like, oh, lucky me. But anyway, but just like listening to the whole narrative you're describing about the kind of lack of pressure testing in the military in the biggest sense, it makes me think about a lot of different things, like government in general, like school systems using outdated methods which are not pressure tested, or like even we don't need to go there, but sometimes I think about even like certain legalization of drugs, like marijuana. Cannabis is legalized, in so many places now, but in my country, if you get caught with like the smallest joint, you're going to go to prison and you're going to have it on record, and it's going to pretty much ruin your whole life. Although it's like, what is that really that bad? So it's a whole
the difference with alcohol, for instance. I mean,
right,
alcohol
exactly.
kills small people, but this is what I said. Like it's blind beliefs that are held, and that stay in place. One of the debates that we have in the armed forces, well, in the army at the minute, especially since the Air Force and the Navy have been allowed to grow beards, is why can't British soldiers in the army, in the ground forces, grow beards? And the worst thing is that you actually have exceptions for some people, like me, on religious grounds, for instance. Sikhs and Muslims are allowed beards. Great, they'll have beards. Because it has been determined that it doesn't hamper operational effectiveness. So if it doesn't hamper operational effectiveness to me, why would it hamper the operational effectiveness of like John Smith over there?
Right.
And it's arbitrary. It is purely arbitrary. But the problem is in a hierarchical organization where information and basically flows from the top down. It's very hard to challenge decisions from the top.
Right.
And yeah.
I have a feeling I'll still get back to this point because it's an important one, that kind of challenge of having strong hierarchy. But just before that, I also wanted to ask, so you mentioned that speaking in general, that the American army and the French army apparently are doing a better job. So in the whole bigger sense, with all countries that you experienced or you know of, how would you say, like, what's the general level of quote unquote pressure testing in the military?
So when I'm saying a better job, I was talking about a better job of teaching martial arts, not necessarily pressure testing and exercise. However, in the US, what I've noticed is that in terms of exercise, because I've exercised there, They do a better job at exercising their troops properly. I mean, in war fighting, not martial arts.
Mm.
And this is because they have set up a very serious opposing forces structure in place. And these guys are full time playing enemy, studying the potential enemies and their tactics and procedures, and they are going to use them. And they will be really a free fighting enemy, and that works. But the problem is, as far as I know, they only use it at a small tactical level.
Mm.
I'm not too sure what the size of this army is, but I'm pretty sure it is not bigger than a regiment. So anything above that, and you fall in the same trap.
Mm.
There's a lot that we could do with simulation,
Mm.
virtual things, especially when it comes to exercising big groups. You don't necessarily have to have them in the field. You can literally do it online and get them to do everything on simulators, because more often than not, it involves actually vehicles, and it's about moving things on the map basically. And of course, when you exercise, what happens is that people intend to move things on the map, and the guys on the ground actually go there, fight there, etc., etc. However, you could do that in a simulator, and this would at least train you to cope with certain situations.
Mm. Yeah. That actually reminds me, and I don't have like very specific data about this, but I watched a video some time ago where there was a story told, and I can't remember which army it was, but apparently some general or something was taken who's like well experienced, and there was a simulation where he was given like a small guerrilla, like kind of like Eastern
Yeah, of
Asian,
course.
whatever type of army, and he had to battle against like a big major army. And in that simulation, he I think the story was that he used the problems which you just described. He knew the way they worked. He knew that they're not efficient at it, and he destroyed the bigger army because he used those he used that to his advantage to prove that the methods which are being used. Do you know about that
So I
something?
had I had I had about a similar story, and it was a U.S. general who basically was
Hmm.
playing the Iranians,
Hmm.
and he managed to win a war against between the United States and Iran. The guy played Iran, and he won.
Hmm. Yeah. So,
Um,
but
yeah.
that kind of narrative, I guess, makes sense when there is a structure which is
Well,
not
this is not a problem. This is perfect. This should happen more often, because, like,
mm,
thanks to that, lessons were learned.
right.
And as I said, we learn through failure, just as in pressure testing. You learn to keep your guard up because you've been punched in the nose.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you won't learn.
Mm,
And it's the same with armies training. So, but the problem is with that failure is you have to fail in a safe environment. Now, if you're training in a gym, you have a sparring session. It's safe. You've got a round, it lasts for so much, and then you go back to your corner. And the guy across you, even though he really actually during those 2 minutes wants actively to hurt you, that end of the day is still your friend. So you've got that measure
mm,
of safety. The problem with the army is that when they train, they can't train like they will fight because of safety reasons. You can't just like lob freaking artillery shells at your own people. They will die. So this is where life simulation comes into play, and this is things that IT, for instance, and the latest progress in virtual reality could really help us with that, because we could train
mm,
as close as we could to react to particular situations and to train against like free thinking adversary, um, especially in war gaming, while the troops are actually you know also learning to pilot their vehicles. And
mm,
if they go on the wrong round, they will roll the vehicle, and that's it. The vehicle is out of action. They're just stranded. They are on foot now, etc. You can do that on sim, um, even though they're not physically training, and they still have to train physically. I mean, they need to be out there, they need to cope with the weather, they need to physically be lifting jerry cans onto vehicles, they need to be carrying machine guns and ammunition, because this is what you do, and yeah, and this is what you will end up doing. They will do that at their level, and they will do things to prepare them for that. But lifting those things against an adversary that is following a scripted scenario is not helping their commanders cope with new situations.
And bringing it a little bit one level down back to hand-to-hand combat, now I realize you mentioned again the French, the American. You
Oh,
said
yeah.
their hand-to-hand combat seems to be a bit better. So what's that better
So
element?
yeah, so my experience of the French, all right, is that first of all they had actually a curriculum for that. They
Mm,
had a career course, so a set course in the army regulations for hand-to-hand combat,
mm,
and so you would do like a course, and then you had several levels, and then you could teach it, etc. What's really interesting is that the French integrated it into what they called their commander courses, which were 3 to 6 week long courses, and they were just like to teach to small units, basically to revert back to guerrilla tactics. And which is really interesting is that these courses were open to the whole of the French army. It wasn't like just for ground combat units. It could be for support and services as well. Uh, you went through it, and if you passed it, you had a badge. And part of the course, it was like a lot of like not sleeping a lot, not eating a lot,
mm,
running everywhere, getting shouted at, of course. But a lot of it was also a lot of assault training, assault courses, shooting, a lot of close quarter combat, and a lot of actual hand to hand. Now, when I was there, the thing is that most of the operations the French were taking at the time, and it was the beginning of the year 2000s, were peacekeeping operations. So it was very oriented towards handling the people like the police would do. And
mm,
we even trained with tonfas,
mm,
and how to put someone on the ground and get his hands behind his back. This is what we did. What's interesting is that the uh, it's grounded. That's what I like about it. It's very grounded. It's punches, kicks, and they're down to earth, efficient, and they train in combat. And before the sessions, it actually gets you get to run around. Basically, supposedly it's to warm up, but it isn't. It's to get you out of breath, to get you in the zone, and then you hear against somebody, and eventually, you're just punching the bag, kicking the bag, etc. Sprawling, sprawl up, and then eventually, however, you start like doing an assault course, an urban assault course, so running around, jumping through windows, etc. And in one of the room, somebody is literally waiting for you with a pair of gloves, and you
mm,
have to defend yourself against him. And it's, as I said, like it's very grounded. And of course, some units will be of better trained than others in those things, especially special forces, and especially I think the GIGN. So they're military in status, but of course their job is anti-terrorist
mm,
action. And I know that they were training in Krav Maga and in Pencak Silat.
mm,
But yeah, most of the guys had like a pretty decent baseline, and the most important thing is that the curriculum evolved. The
mm,
curriculum, the French curriculum, is still evolving and adapting as people are actually testing things. They have cells, the sports cells, where you have the guys who are in their spare time train fighters, will literally train, test things, and feed it back to the hierarchy, which will amend the curriculum to make it more grounded.
Hmm.
And this is what I think happened, especially the U.S. Army, where um, the Marines first and then the Army change completely their approach to martial arts to make something that took a lot of pages from MMA's book.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, that's good to hear, and it also makes me wonder. So when we connected up on Messenger via messages, I believe you wrote that the article. So the article got some traction, got some interest, and if I understood correctly, the British military also kind of picked it up. Is that true? And if yes, then what happened?
Wait. The article I wrote it on the platform, the Werewolf Room, which is absolutely awesome because it gives a voice to anyone,
Hmm.
and it just brings up debates within the army, and anyone could write. I mean, you could write for the Werewolf Room if you want to. It's just about submitting an article, and you've got a bunch of people working in their spare time. They're not getting paid for that because well, some of them are just like military. They are officers or, but you've got civilians as well, and you could be a university professor, which is an expert on a particular foreign country or law of armed conflict, and you can write an article. Uh, Basically anyone, and it gave me a voice. I'm a non-commissioned officer. I mean, I come from the floor. I started as a simple soldier, and it gives us a voice, and we can raise issues. And as a platform, it is a platform that is read and that has been recommended by the I think it was the chief of general staff, so the head of the army really. So yeah, so it got the attention of some senior officers, well, officers that are a lot more senior than me. But the good thing is that uh, both my articles, I think, it eventually made it also across the Atlantic and into the US,
Hmm.
thanks to some um, I wouldn't say celebrities, but some people that have a lot more followers than me on social media, who pretty much like retweeted or shared it on Facebook,
Hmm.
which is good, which is absolutely great.
So why do you think? To me, it's almost like a self-evident answer, but just to bring it up. So why do you think that article became so popular and it was shared? What do you think is the main reason for that?
There are two reasons: people either liked it or absolutely hated it, which is basically what I'm trying to get at, is to stir a discussion.
Hmm.
Um, if you think I'm wrong, come back to me and tell me why. And the
Hmm.
problem is like some of the, I would call them the haters, but actually I wish they had actually argued. But people were saying like, "Oh, this is shit. I'm absolutely, I don't agree at all with the author." And they're like, "But tell me why. Write an article. You can answer." And the Wiggle Room absolutely loves this. They love to publish an article and then publish answers. If you write an article, absolutely demolishing an article which we should not agree with, they absolutely love it. I know the editors will look for that because they want discussion. This is the way you progress. This is the way you can reach that not necessarily a middle ground, because middle ground is not always the good thing, but at least you have like you have debate. You have debate, and yeah. So this is what I'm looking for. I want to you know create discussions and get people to talk about it in good or bad. If it's bad, tell me why. Tell me why I'm wrong. Argue, and yeah,
Hmm.
back it up.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you here, and I relate with that. It's actually related also to something that happened just this morning. I woke up together with my girlfriend, and she showed me a video on her YouTube feed where there was this. I don't even sure like Asian person or something. It doesn't really matter, but there's someone I didn't know made a video like it was episode 4. I didn't see the other 3 episodes of a person critiquing my work, and I was like, and I saw it, and I was like, and I answered it with enthusiasm. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let's. She wanted to click it off, and I was like, no, I want to listen. I want to see what this person has to say, and I listened to the arguments, and I was like, oh, actually, well. We actually agree on that, but that person thought they were disagreeing with me. But I was like, I loved it. But it's just there's other cases where, and that's how I define a hater. A hater is somebody who expresses negative emotions or whatnot without any arguments, without anything to back it up. No, that's just basically a hater because it's just hatred. But if somebody hates me but writes an argument, I'm like, yeah, I can live with that. I'm interested. So it's nice. It seems like we're thinking along the same lines here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, on my first article, somebody basically published it on Reddit, which I didn't know, and somebody commented like, "Oh, that's probably some kind of officer because like only an officer could like write something like that," and his wife probably got banged by some kind of like probably ran away with some special forces guy, and that's why he's written what he's written. And I'm there like, is that your argument attacking
Yeah.
me? Especially like pretty much like inventing a parallel life.
Mm,
But if you want to discuss, mate, just discuss. Just write to me.
mm.
I'm open to it.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I guess so. Just to let everyone know, I'll open up the live chat for questions soon enough, so everyone can start preparing those questions. But before we head there, there's also a couple of subjects, at least lightly. I think they could have whole podcasts about them, but let's touch them at least a little bit. So you mentioned your other article, which I have written down the name of it. It's on the toxicity of the warrior's ethos. So
yeah.
what's that article about?
So this is an article that argues that for soldiers, which we are, the term warrior is hopefully uh, irrelevant, if not toxic, dangerous.
Hmm.
And the reason why I said that is that by essence, a warrior is somebody who is part of his own caste. So he's separate from society, from the wider society, on the one
Hmm.
hand. So he's got separate values. And most importantly, he's not accountable.
Hmm.
And it's the accountability thing that is very important. Nowadays, who are warriors? Who will not? Who don't answer to anything but their own group, their own tribe, etc. Well, it's the people that we, armies of liberal democracies, fight. It's terrorists, it's insurgents, it's drug cartels. That's the people. The problem is there's a tendency in armies to refer back to historical warriors, to take them as some kind of totemic ancestors, Vikings and whatnot. I absolutely love Vikings. I actually studied them in history when I was a student. Um, and they're very interesting because they were not really warriors. They were first and foremost traders that happened to know how to fight and that
Hmm.
just ended up like raping and pillaging their way through Europe, but always avoiding the main adversary forces. They were just like doing hit and runs all the time, which they were doing really well. But there you go. Or European knights, and more often than not, there's a bit of an ethnic connotation to it as well.
Hmm.
I mean, you will never see uh, somebody basically from either Europe or North America basically saying like, yeah, those Zulu warriors were really good. I'm actually going to make a patch with them. Funny enough, even though
Hmm.
the Zulu actually beat the British Army and were probably in the 19th century the most efficient warriors. But then again, to me, the Zulus were soldiers more than warriors. That's now that can be argued. So basically, my whole point was to say that if you promote warrior, as a model, what you promote is an accountability for war crimes, cutting them from wider society, which will cause other problems in time. And the saddest thing about this article is that I have, just after writing it, I've been a little bit vindicated by what's happened, especially among the Navy SEALs in the US and the Australian SAS. There has been a string of scandals of them committing war crimes,
Hmm.
and I haven't heard of it yet. But I've read news about similar things happening with British Special Forces, although it's been a while since. Um, but this is the trap that we shouldn't fall into. Um, what do you fight for, if not values?
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, we fight for the guys next to us. That's what we do. But when our country goes at war, what are we, as a collective, as part of a nation, fighting for?
Hmm. Yeah. So I was thinking, because there's that, the word of toxicity, and initially I thought, because I didn't have a chance to read the article, I skimmed through it, I looked at it, but I was hoping to get to know more about it from you. When I read about toxicity, I obviously thought about the toxic masculinity, and it seems like it's not exactly the same.
There's an element of that. I haven't brought it up because I am not knowledgeable enough on the subject. This is not
Hmm.
something I've read a lot about. This is something I can get on board with because I can see the effect of it. If it does exist, um, I've already witnessed what it does. However, uh, I would need to look into the concept to know what it actually entails. But the article starts with the glorification of the movie 300, for instance,
Hmm.
and basically the glorification of the six pack. That's what it is, of beards and six packs.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, so when you're talking about toxic masculinity, yeah, of course, the warrior trope is also a model of masculinity.
Hmm.
It is. So you promote a certain image of the fighting male. That's what you're
Hmm.
doing. Because again, like as much as like all those warrior types will not have patches of like a guy from a completely different ethnic background. Funny enough, you will not see them wearing a patch with a Viking shell maiden, for instance, or another kind of like a female warrior.
Hmm.
So you absolutely have that. Um, and of course, if you look at 300, it offers a certain model of masculinity. Absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, I don't know if this is related, but just something that it brought to my mind. So I guess maybe in a way, this may be a question to ask if it's related or not. It sprouts from a discussion I had recently with Matt Thornton. He's a friend of mine. Also, I consider him my coach, BJJ coach, and he also has experience in MMA. Like, he started teaching MMA back in the day before MMA existed. And he mentioned, like, back then MMA was like Fight Club. Only the tough guys would come in, and the survival rate was very, like, the dropout rate was very high. It wasn't for everyone. And we were also discussing, the funny moment of it is that the people who really needed fighting skills weren't able to join that, because the environment there was so in a way toxic, and there's that whole masculinity as well, but it's just the whole intensity was not welcoming. But now nowadays we have MMA fighters and BJJ practitioners who, and it's a great point that Matt made. You come in on the mat, like an MMA mat or a BJJ mat, and you look at the guys, and usually you'd be like, "Oh, this guy, I'll beat the heck out of him. He's like a nerd. He's like a nice guy, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna beat him up. But he rolls you into a pretzel or knocks you out because he just has these great fighting skills, and it debunks that myth that in order to be a good fighter, that you need to have that image, which I think is an old kind of idea that you need to be big and have tattoos and look badass, and it's like they're not related. It's not one and the same. They're two different things. So I don't know, is that at all related in some way? Is there any parallel
You
there?
you will obviously, but I mean, as I said, like in the army, it's like you will have that 1 out of 8 people who are actually the fighting guys. And as
Mm,
I said, they don't necessarily do the majority of the killing because other people actually help a lot more. But I mean, there you go. Um, but we all admire or actually swoon over special forces. Why? Because they embody things that um, we are seeking. You know,
mm,
their endurance, their mental resilience, their you know their mental strength, also their capability, and then of course their actual jobs. I mean, they spend their time kicking jobs, killing bad guys. They've got the latest equipment, that all the shiny gizmos, and of course they are paid a lot, etc., etc. And they do secret stuff that they can't tell you about, otherwise they would have to kill you. And we admire them. Of course we do.
mm,
Uh, in regards to part of the job, they are they require qualities that most soldiers admire, but they are specialists. What they do, nobody else can do. However, a military chef, what he does, the guy from the special forces can't do.
mm,
So they are a specialist, like any other specialist. The rest of the army admires them because to become a specialist in their branch, you have to have qualities that all the other guys admire.
mm, mm.
But
Yeah,
that's it.
I see. And just before we open up uh, the question bit, you also mentioned the question of gender, and I have a feeling that's not one to cover shortly. But can you say a few words of uh, what did you have in mind when we were discussing about it?
Yeah. It's interesting because like we've been discussing about like the whether the way we train to fight is relevant or not, and it's the only valid question. All right, it's what you should look at is not what has been done before or some arbitrary criterias. It should be, can we win a fight the way we do things right now? It's that should be the only metric. Now with women, be it with like in the army at the minute, there's been a lot of like going back and forth with what they can do, what they can't do, and from what I've witnessed, all right, they can do what's required of them,
Hmm.
and this should be the end of it.
Hmm.
Assessing them to criterias which are arbitrary or which have nothing to do with the job that's going to be asked from them and from all of us is irrelevant. And in terms of fighting, I told you earlier on, I had that in the British Army we don't have any combative system, but most of the people who are in know how to handle themselves because of their backgrounds and upbringing. And I will tell you one thing. So, for most of the trolls always going on with like, yeah, females shouldn't be allowed. Like, back in my days, things were like this, or yeah, can she carry this? I would pit them against one of my female Glaswegian um, bombardiers. That's why we call corporals in the artillery, in the Royal Artillery. I would pit them against her, and I would happily watch her demolish them. Because first of all, she's Glaswegian, so she can fight. I mean, she's Scottish, and second, I mean, she's an actual boxing champion, and yeah, she's just a great girl.
Hmm. Nice. So I will move it to questions, and so to let everyone know, um, that's the time for everyone to write a question. There's a bit of a delay between what we speak and what they see, so now is the time to get them. But I do have one already from Amit. He's saying the question is, what styles or techniques have you found do work or have been more effective for military? What do the most proficient guys you have sorry, what do the most proficient guys you know have in common? So these are two questions. So I guess let's start with the first one. What styles or techniques have you found work or have been more effective
So,
for military?
so I haven't been involved in any hand-to-hand fighting. I knew
Mm,
guys who have, especially in the early days of the war in Iraq, because it was like door-to-door fighting, literally. And none of them mentioned technique. And I think that technique is relevant in this case. It was a question of state of mind. If you
mm,
had that aggression and if you had the jump on the guy and sheer physical strength and the will to kill him before he killed you, that was what decided the fight. Um, it That's what it's about. Um, it's not pretty. It's not technique. It's not. It's you go into a room. The guy is literally against your barrel, so you can't literally get your barrels pointed at him. He's pushing against you. You're just going to slam into him harder than he slams into you, and knock him on the ground and end him there. This is how it works. And I think, seeing that, I think that some techniques would help, but not. That's not what I meant. It's not the techniques that would help. Some fighting methods would help. Fighting methods that don't teach you techniques or rigid techniques to adhere to, but actual strategies or who train you to cope with the unknown and teach you how to create opportunities to take the jump and to take the initiative. That's what I think is the most important.
mm. So I think that almost kind of covers also the second question, but to put it on the spotlight, the second part is, what do the most proficient guys you know have in common?
Baseline training into a pressure tested method. Um, I know a fair few guys who are doing Krav Maga at the minute, and even though I doubt the effectiveness of Krav Maga on its own, I think that because these guys have a very good, a very sound, solid basics of boxings or some kind of grappling art or both, with them, Krav Maga becomes what it was always meant to be, because they can use their knowledge, that knowledge in Krav Maga, and combine it to whatever boxing and whichever grappling art they took, taught them, especially in terms of like reactivity, in terms of improvisation, in terms of coping with pressure, stress. And as I said, there's no better training than getting into a ring with a guy that wants to hurt you.
Hmm, cool. So a question from Lewis. So Ryan, are you saying that the British Army has gone backwards? When my dad was a para, he learned Defendo, but this was when some older guys were still around.
That's interesting because I didn't know that. Now, Defendo is quite an old martial art, and I
Hmm,
think it might be even older than the Sykes and Fairbairn's CQB that the Royal Marines are still using. I think it has It has. I mean, there is no curriculum. There's no official curriculum for hand-to-hand fighting. However, your dad might have been in the army when Northern Ireland was still a thing, in which case, learning some kind of hand-to-hand technique would have been like very, very useful because it was, as I said, door kicking and going straight against people who actually wanted to, worse than kill you, actually abduct you, steal your rifle or something like that. So that would have made sense. I wasn't aware of that, and to be honest, I didn't know it was a thing. But right now, I can tell you that there is no combative system taught in the British Army at all. And I'm pretty sure it's been the case for at least a good 20 years.
Hmm. So a question from Marie. So are you planning to keep writing articles about the relationship between martial arts and the military?
Good question. No, I think I'm done on that subject. I think I've written what I wanted to write to basically to start that debate, and I think I'm going to move on to completely other things, um, because my main point was to draw a parallel rather than to write about the relationship. I drew a parallel between what Rokas had come up with, his analysis, and what I had noticed in the way we train to fight as an army and not individually.
Christian, one of the members of the channel, is asking, so the idea of methodology of sparring in military, I think there's the missing word, is used because it seems that it's mostly the drilling mentality for weapons or tactics. So I guess Christian maybe hasn't seen the whole podcast, I mean live stream, but do you want? Can you take it from there, or shall we
Yeah,
answer
yeah,
that?
sure. So he's absolutely right. This is precisely the point of my article. So the we don't use any kind of sparring, but at the same time we can't do it. We can't do a full sparring like you would do, like as I said, in a boxing ring or an octagon, because we use live ammunition. They kill people. They don't. You just don't just like give them a black eye. So when we use weapons and tactics, you have to work your way around it. One way to do that at short range, especially for fighting in built up areas, is simunition. Simunition works because you're shooting at people and they will feel it at the other end. If for those people who don't know, simulation is basically reduced load actual pyrotechnic round with a plastic projectile with a little bit of like marking paint on it. So it's like paintball on steroid. If you do it right, it hurts, it stings. But that's one way to do it. But as soon as you go beyond those that very short 40-meter range, 20-meter range, this is it. We have nothing to simulate. Oh, well, we do have something to simulate that. We've got the Saab system that is called TES for what is it? The tactical something simulation. Can't remember it. Wrote it in my article though. So basically, some giant laser tag game, and that works on vehicles as well. So they use that, and although it works, for some reason, we still don't use it with a free thinking enemy, aka a full sparring. There's still a linear scenario, precise steps where you every time you complete a stage, you go back to your original state and you start again. You know, like a level in a video game, instead of an actual scenario branching out in different courses of action, or even like an absolutely complete improvisation. It These are questions that are unanswered.
One more question from Christoph. What would your idea of a curriculum for the modern armed forces and the individual warfighter look like?
Is it in terms of like martial arts fighting? Is it hand to hand?
That's a good question. It almost seems to me like it's speaking in general, but it'll be difficult to confirm because there's a lag and delay and there's a bunch of other comments. So take it wherever you feel like.
So I, I'm going to say something. All right. I would say that boxing is the training for boxing, especially all the physical conditioning for it, is a great way to prepare a soldier because you've got good cardio, good general fitness in terms of like upper body and everything because you do loads of push-ups, good core strength, and speed and agility. So that's I think boxing is probably one of the best thing. But what you would be missing is all the team side of it, and this is where sports like rugby come into play because rugby is a contact sport. So it will teach you to take the hits as well, but you have that team side of it, playing with others. Uh, yeah, and tactics. Tactics. Rugby is a very tactical game, but I'm saying rugby. It's an example. Come up with whatever you want. I mean, I don't know much about hockey, for instance, but hockey might be the same. Um, so yeah, I would say boxing is really good, and also, as I said, like it teaches you to handle yourself. And now soldiers are known to cause a lot of trouble in bars and go up against bouncers. So learning to handle yourself will probably help you uh, cope with that before you eventually land in my office for a good rest down.
Yeah. UT is asking, what martial artists can learn from the military? It's kind of an interesting question. So, for the way I understand it, what a martial artist can learn from the military?
That's a very good question. Um, I'm not sure you can learn from the military. I think that whatever you can learn in the military is something you can learn in martial arts. During
Mm.
the parallels that I drew at the beginning when I said that I was looking for things in martial arts and I ended up like finding them in the military. I had found them in martial arts as well, but I found the same things, especially values of respect, of loyalty, and things like that. All this you have that in both. So I don't think that on this side you can learn from one or coming from one you could learn it in the other. However, you will learn both lessons, like things like humility, for instance. And one of the things I'm learning right now is learning. I'm learning a lot from my subordinates and from more junior ranks, and I absolutely love it. It's an eye opener, and uh, although the army is a pyramidal structure and things come from the top down, I absolutely love to reach out um, to what's happening below, and it's great, and that is something I think martial artists could learn from. Is to reach out to students. Have you ever seen a sensei literally asking one of his students, "What's your background? Can you teach me this?"
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, and this is a bit where my usual martial arts journey, infamous mindset comes in. But in traditional martial arts, I think that's very uncommon. But I was refreshed when I saw, like, in combat sports, I would see some situations where if a better guy would come in, like let's say a wrestler comes into a BJJ class, and the wrestler is doing some move. It wouldn't be a surprise that the coach would come in and be like, "Oh, whoa, this looks really good. Can you step instead of me and teach that to all of us?" I think that happens, but in traditional martial arts, where there's the hierarchy is very much emphasized, I think that's rare.
But so this is another parallel that could be drawn. BJJ is absolutely fantastic because it is still evolving. It is actually constantly evolving. It's
Right.
it's some kind of like organism that is like growing limbs every time, arms and legs everywhere, and this is what's absolutely fantastic about it. And now the military needs to learn about that because
Mm.
we are always facing evolving threats, and
Mm.
we need to learn that constant evolving, searching, trying to find new ways, kind of like state of mind.
Nice. So a Kaizen Mind, which is actually a friend of mine, Linda Heffernan, is asking. Well, she's saying, firstly, I look forward to reading your article.
Thank
Secondly,
you.
what in terms of mindset training could Aikido offer in military conflict situations? It's a big
Oh,
one.
but that's a very good question. I absolutely love it. Um, in terms, so I in a military conflict situation, I think there's a lot of tactical situation where that could work. The whole thing of using your strength, your adversary's strength against himself, kind of works, or actually absorbing him, absorbing his energy, and then like turning that around him, is things that can work on tactical or strategic level. Giving an example would be to basically absorb, leaving your enemy like to punch through, but go too far and extend his supply lines, for instance, and eventually, when he's extended them, all you have to do is cut them, and you leave him starving of fuel for vehicle, ammunition, and food for the guys. And all you have to do is reduce them. That is an example, for instance. So these are examples. But in terms of mindset, as per se, um, I think that one of the most the biggest lesson, I think, and this is the one of the things I like the most about Aikido, is that towards the end of his life, O Sensei used to say, Aikido is love, and it's about reconciliation in the end. Um, and although I'm a soldier, uh, and my job is, if not to kill and break, at least to help kill and break, um, ultimately, my job is actually peace. My job is to end conflict as
Mm.
quickly as possible to avoid destruction and death, or to get between warring factions and stop it. And I think this is the lesson. This is the mindset of Aikido: is if you have a chance to spare, not to break, not to kill, and to bring that guy to the ground and make him understand, stop fighting, it's no use. That's the best course of action.
Nice. Another interesting question. So PLTP from TLTP. Do you think martial arts are more popular now than ever in history, considering that now hand-to-hand fights are an exception more than the ancient form?
That's a great question again. Um, I don't think. I think that there's correlation, but not um, causation in
Mm.
this case. Um, I think that martial arts are more popular now because of globalization, because of exchanges between East and West, because we've been able to confront different hand-to-hand cultures. And I mean, the first jiu-jitsu practitioners um, came back from Japan, or the first kung fu practitioners came back from China in the late 19th century in Victorian England, while at the same time you had Chinese immigrants in San Francisco and elsewhere. Um, the history of the popularity of martial arts is the history of globalization. I don't think it has anything to do with their actual usefulness degrading in modern fighting. Um, However, it is interesting to note that they are less and less relevant as they are growing more and more popular. Um,
Mm.
this 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 is quite interesting. I think you should think about it and PLTP and maybe do a little bit of research into it because it's an interesting phenomenon.
Mm. Yeah, that's I'll just jump in very quickly here as well, and because it is a great question, and kind of that realization that yeah, probably in most countries, especially modern Western countries, physical conflicts are more and more rare. But another thing that comes to my mind, why I think martial arts are becoming more and more popular, especially such, and again, I'm going to say like BJJ. I think it is very popular these days. People blame me for being like a BGG fanboy, and I don't think that's related. But what I want to say is, one thing I think we are as a modern technological civilization, we're missing physical contact, and I
Mhm.
think like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's almost therapeutic to kind of get your hands on another person. There's a
You
lot of
mean to have a sweaty 100 kilo plus guy literally like leaning on your face? Yes, I agree.
yeah, yeah, there's something nice about it. But
There
yeah,
is.
and I think yeah, we're tactile as human beings. We're tactile, and there's the community aspect. We get to hang out with people. I think we came from tribes, and martial arts are like tribes. We feel like a part of the tribe. There's the development aspect. I think there's so much that martial arts offer that counter the civilization that we are living in today, and kind of supplements the things which we are missing, which go beyond the it's all about self-defense. And I think I like what Matt Borton says about BJJ, but it applies to others too, that most people come to martial arts starting wanting to learn self-defense, but after about 6 months or a year, that is not their interest anymore, but they find other things which are almost more meaningful than that. Then that's the reason they stay for decades. But do you agree with that, Ryan? Do you
Yeah,
think that's
yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I even knew like the other way around. I knew a guy who started BJJ just because like he was fascinated by the concept, especially because like the guy who was teaching him like BJJ was had his own concept that he called like move evolution, evolution of the move and everything. Fancy names, but he was teaching decent BJJ, and my guy was just doing it because it was trendy, and he ended up because he was from South Africa. He ended up actually uh, catching a thief with his BJJ skills.
ah,
So it went the other way around, but there you go.
nice. Well, we have time at least for a couple more questions. By the way, are you okay on time? Am I not keeping you for too long?
I No, I've got no time limit whatsoever.
Okay, cool. So Peter, I don't know if this question is right down your alley, but he's talking about trench fighting in World War I, and there's an assumption made that the Germans were more efficient than French and British in close quarters. So I don't know if that's true. History is not my thing. So I
I,
think
I
you
don't
seem
think
like
so. I don't think
yeah.
it is. I think
Okay.
it's a bold claim and an unsubstantiated one. Um, how, I can see where it came from. In 1918, what happened is the German had their massive spring offensive, the famous Kaiserschlacht, and um, but what made them not more efficient, but made them more effective actually, uh, wasn't individual fighting or anything like this. It was that they had actually devised tactics especially for that and integrated them into wider plans. And also, they had designed completely new weapons to help them for that. One of them being the submachine gun. So I don't think they were individually more efficient than the French and the British in close quarters. there are like various reports, for instance, of the Canadians being absolutely ruthless as trench raiders against the Germans. As far as I know, the only specialist and specially trained trench raiders were actually the Italian Sardites, which have like a record that is a complete opposite of the Italian army's performance on the Alpine front against the Austrians. But I've never heard of the Germans being more efficient than the French and Brits, as I said, apart from the special Stoßtruppen from 1918. But then again, that was because of tactics and new weapons.
So Cian Elliott is asking, have you guys listened to Jocko Willing speak on this subject? He commanded the most effective SEAL team in the Iraq War and speaks often about the effectiveness of MMA in one-on-one combat. So I guess maybe just like a general opinion about Jocko.
So
I'm sure you have one.
yeah, of course I do. First of all, I actually quoted his it's on YouTube, the podcast about self-defense, in my article. So in the footnotes, there's a hyperlink to his interview, because I absolutely agree with the man, because he's broken it down, he's laid it out, he's got the experience, and he tells the story how it was about him fighting his friend who had been practicing traditional martial arts for 20 years and kept like pinning him to the ground over and over again. But most importantly, funny enough, Jocko Willing is somebody that I've made a lot of use of his talks, especially his TED Talks, about extreme ownership, because this is something very important, especially for junior leaders in NCOs like myself, is ownership of whatever they do, and whatever they have. Also, I mean, we're in charge of equipment and of people. Whatever they do, whatever happens to them, whatever happens altogether, is ultimately down to me. So that ownership thing is very important. I am not allowed to turn around and say, well, what could I do about that? That's him, and that's on him. It's not. I'm in charge of these people. I train them. I'm in charge of their careers. Yeah, it's my responsibility, and I am accountable for what they do.
Yeah, I'll jump in here for a moment a bit as well, and about the concept of extreme ownership. That's actually kind of a concept I was playing around with already in the past before the book came out, but then I really resonated with it because till this day I consider that like kind of a bit of a generalization, but I like to say that strong people are the ones who look at, and the people who evolve are the ones who are asking what I did wrong. And in a way, like weak people, although I think it's a stupid term, but let's say weak people are people who are stagnant. They're usually the ones who are saying and asking, what did the other person do wrong? And I see that tendency quite strongly in various people. Like, and it's almost like a rule. Like people who always blame others, they're usually, first of all, they're usually much more of the part of the problem than they think. But also they're stagnant because it's like they don't evolve much because it's never their fault. It's like, let's say somebody stole something from me and I'm like, oh well, it's that guy's fault, and it makes sense. But if like, what did I do wrong? If I ask myself that, what's my responsibility here? There's so much place for evolution. So like, maybe I was walking in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Maybe I had my wallet too exposed. Like there's so much we can learn when we ask what I did wrong. So I think it's such a powerful question. So I appreciate that Jocko made that like a public, popular concept in question. So the next one from Eric, it's a tricky question, and I don't know if I understood it correctly, but let's see if we can play with it. So to hammer everything is a nail. Yeah, this tells us both perspective and blind spots. What do you see as the blind spots brought on by your perspective in your respective arts? Sounds like
that's a great thing. So,
okay.
Now, I consider myself, to take back the metaphor, not as a hammer. I'm a Swiss knife. I've had several lives. I've lived in 4 different countries. I served in 2 different armies. I've held 5 different jobs that are wildly different. I mean, I've been a soldier, but I've been a journalist as well, and I've been a teacher, and I've worked in advertising. That's my background. So my perspective is quite broad. That said, of course, I have blind spots. Loads of them, probably. If I knew about them, there wouldn't be blind spots. So I don't know what my blind spots are, because if I knew, I'd made sure to actually at least, tackle them or make them not be blind spots anymore. Um, I think that one thing I've missed in Aikido, for instance, is I didn't know about Tomiki Aikido, so I was doing Aikikai side of things for a good 5 years, which is very formal. So of course, my perspective on Aikido is biased. This is my knowledge of Aikido is of course like limited to the kind of Aikido I studied. But then again, I do not generalize. And I've explained that also in my article. Whatever I say is only valid to a certain extent, and I'm only talking about my experience. However, in general, that experience is pretty much validated by a lot of other similar examples around the globe in terms of my conclusions. As for BJJ, man, my massive blind spot is that I'm a rookie. I'm a complete rookie. I've got loads to learn. Absolutely love it. I've had to stop for about like close to a year because of COVID and of the requirements of duty to Her Majesty. But I'm looking forward to go back into it. But this would be my blind spot basically in BJJ, is that I'm new to it. I'm discovering it. So I might have I might be partial to it because I haven't been that in depth into it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I'm thinking about the question for myself as well. And I really liked how you point out that the blind spots are blind spots literally because they're the things we don't see, and if we see them, they're not blind spots anymore. But that's what makes it tricky but I think the difference is between people who acknowledge that they have blind spots. They acknowledge that I don't know what they are, but I know they are there. And there are also the people who are like, oh, no, I don't have any blind spots. It's like, well, you do, you just don't see them. For me personally, for a long time, even in days when I was still just learning Aikido as a living student, one of my favorite questions used to be, what is there that I do not see? What is there that I do not understand, that I'm not seeing? And it's almost like an impossible question to ask. It's kind of a conundrum, but that would lead me to consider, okay, there is something I'm not seeing, and I wonder what that is. And sometimes I would, by thinking a lot about it, I would sometimes discover, oh, actually, you know what, that's kind of a blind spot. That's something I didn't think about. And I think that's one of the things which helped me in my martial arts journey to move on through the ways that I moved to, because I did constantly look for, okay, what am I not seeing? What am I not admitting? And I think that helped me realize, oh, there's actually a side to Aikido that nobody around me is talking about, but there's like some stuff which is not that great, and that led me to question things. But then today as well, I'm sure I have my blind spots as well. I think it's very easy. Martial arts is my main area, so that's what I'm thinking about. But it's very easy to be biased, unconsciously biased about the things you focus on. It's like whether you want it or not. Like, yeah, like I'm sure even unwillingly, I am sometimes biased about things more than I should be, or biased in a negative way. But I do my best to notice that and to correct it, and sometimes I do. So I think that's what matters.
Yeah. I think the day I stop questioning myself, why I think that's it. I've reached the point where whatever I believe in that's it. I'm going to stick to those beliefs without like actually questioning them or constantly like questioning, as I said, like myself. Shoot me. Honestly, like
Oh, you
that's
just put it
it.
on record, so you have to be
Yeah,
careful. You have to make sure you don't do that.
yeah. But I mean, it's yeah. We of course we're biased. Consciously, unconsciously. There are guns I'm going to stick to in terms of beliefs because basically I've taken them for some reasons and nobody has convinced me that they were wrong so far, even though I discussed them. But apart from, but I'm still open. So I'm not going to stick with them regardless. It's just that nobody has like literally come up with arguments to basically sway me the other way around. So that's the way it goes, and it's the same with martial arts.
Hmm. So I see there's a lot of discussions happening in the live chat, but the questions are running out. But I found at least one more, which I think is a good one. So from ASHML, what do you think about the idea that everybody uses that thing, so it's good? For example, a lot of armies use Krav Maga, so it must be good.
So I would say that in itself, no. But I mean, as an argument, anyway, the logic of it doesn't stand. Just because loads of people do it doesn't mean it's good. There's no logic to that. However, the whole thing is ask yourself, what did other armies pick Krav Maga in the first place? So one of them is the reputation of the Israeli Defense Forces and the fact that it has been almost continuously, if not continuously, at war since 1948, including, and especially actually in urban areas. And Krav Maga was developed, if I remember correctly, in the 30s, and basically people have been training into it for quite a while now. So it's been developed, and it has that reputation of being super effective. I think it could be. I think it has the potential to be. I've heard very good things about it, but most of the guys who have managed to make it work, from what I understand, had before Krav Maga, as I said, like a solid baseline of some kind of like pressure tested combat method background. I think that unless you train into punching and getting punched first and grappling, Krav Maga will not work. But what I find really interesting in Krav Maga is how they train you to cope with situations that are not one-on-one fighting. So against several people, against being ambushed, being jumped on, and things like that. That's interesting. But the limit is the problem with the Krav Maga is its limitation is the same as army training. Because it's actually meant to kill people with your bare hands or to neutralize them with, I don't know, maximum prejudice, as they say. You can't train fully in them. You can't go with full force. So your training will never be realistic because you will always be like holding yourself back, which is the problem with the army. The army will say like, yeah, because of safety, we don't do that. This is why we drill into that. But yeah, the army has a way to train into that. As I said, like with simulation, Krav Maga is completely different.
So, last question from the audience, and that's from Joseph Testa. Most effective military hand-to-hand system in existence at present, in your opinion? Do you have an answer for that?
So no, I don't have an answer for that. I think that I will not dare to venture an answer unless they were confronted to each other. I think there should be some kind of international tournaments of military combatives, and where like Chinese Sanda would get pitted against like Russian Sistema, for instance, against Krav Maga, against the French system, against MCMAP for the Marines, and so on and so forth. I would love to see that happening. I would love to see, you know, Japanese beating the crap out of like Koreans or vice versa. That would be awesome. Think of it.
Yeah, I like that. That sounds fun. That would be a good movie too. um, so there's actually just one last one I quickly noticed, and I think we can cover it quickly. So question to both. My sensei had me do awareness training as part of martial arts, so I could recognize danger. Is this something all martial arts schools should do? I have a clear, strong opinion about that, but what about you?
Cringe. Um, you know, one of the best video that came out at the height of the spate of knife crimes that we had in London was about how to defend yourself against a knife. And you had this dude. He was a Londoner, big guy. He comes in and says, "All right, today I'm going to teach you how to defend yourself against a knife fight." And the guy pulled a knife, and he starts running, jumping fences, and running away. And this is it. Awareness is really good. First of all, of course, it's. I mean, brokers will have spoken to people in self-defense, and they will tell you awareness is only one thing. The first thing is not to put yourself in a situation where you would need that. It's avoiding certain areas at certain times and things like that. Now, this is a tricky one because, for instance, a lot of women already do that. And it's not fair on them. They shouldn't be denying themselves some spaces because it's supposedly dangerous. They're gonna get like sexually harassed or assaulted in certain areas. They should be avoiding them. However, if the danger is real and real for both sexes, I would say avoid. Then comes like eventually the awareness, gauge the atmosphere, look around you and things like that. Sure, you have that. But did your martial arts sensei trained you in cardio and trained you in parkour to, you know, just do one if ever you get attacked? No. So yeah, run away. Give your wallet and run away.
Cool. I think you covered that quite well. So I don't necessarily need to jump in. So last question from me for this time. A question I like to ask at the end of pretty much every live stream. So a summary of everything that you said.
Boom!
Like the short summary.
He's just dropping that like a grenade, man. A summary of what I've just said. First of all, I think that at the minute, the British Army is training to do combat at battle group and brigade level, like a traditional martial artist drills himself to perfect moves, but not to actually cope with a real situation. And that's due to not using pressure testing. That's one thing. In terms of combatives, I think that also the British Army needs a combative system, aka a hand-to-hand training curriculum, because it has huge benefits, which I actually didn't talk about for soldiers, because the benefits of like training in hand-to-hand go way beyond being efficient in hand-to-hand combat. It's also about training an ethos and actually giving a goal for the combat conditioning. If you train to fight for a session, if you spend like half an hour actually doing push-ups, squats and whatnot, because you know that in the next 20 minutes you're going to actually fight, it makes a lot more sense than just a normal physical training session and you don't know the direct application of that. So that's one thing. And lastly, yeah, it's be critical. Think about what you say. Don't just like hold your beliefs just because they keep you in your comfort zone, or they reassure you, or they tackle they comfort your own insecurities. Don't just like basically defend a martial art just because it's been the one that you've been practicing. You should think the other way around, right? Think quite the opposite. Ask yourself, is that thing suited to what I want? I absolutely do not bar myself from going back to Aikido, because Aikido was brilliant. I loved practicing it. It was absolutely beautiful moves. I loved cooperating with someone on the tatami, and it was great. And I look forward to doing that again. At the minute, I'm looking for effectiveness, so I went to BJJ, and in BJJ, I'm getting choked and armbarred, and it hurts, and it's good too. It's it's that. So whatever you choose, just ask yourself and be honest with yourself. Is that what I need to achieve the goal I want to achieve? That's it.
Nice. That's a very good, successful summary, I'd say. So the very last bit for everyone at the bottom of the screen. So the name of the article from Ryan: the British Army has a black belt in Bullshido. That's a very good title, by the way. YouTube worthy. That's why I stole it from you and used it for this video.
The title helped it a lot get around the internet. So yeah.
Yeah, the title unfortunately makes a big difference. That's part of the job I hate, but it's part of the job. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you again, Ryan, for everything. It was great
No,
talking.
thank you very much, Rokas.
I think it was very enlightening for a lot of people, and so now this is going to be on record. Hopefully, it's going to reach even more ears, and hopefully, we'll see some changes
That's
happening.
great.
And just one more thought on my end. I also realized, like we spoke about the pressure testing, and I'm so fixated on martial arts because that's my work and the curse of knowledge, I guess. But our talk today kind of opened up my thinking. Oh, actually, this can be applied to so many things, and
Yeah.
I wonder, like,
Emergency situations like you know uh, freak weather, natural disasters, pandemics.
yeah, absolutely. I was also thinking school system,
Yeah,
governments, laws. There's a lot of things it could use. But yeah, hopefully that idea will spread to more and more fields, and we'll see more pressure testing not only in martial arts but in everything. Oh, cool.
hopefully. Thank you very much for having me on this live stream, and well, from me personally, keep up the good work, mate. Because like I wouldn't have written these articles if it wasn't for your YouTube channel. So kudos to you, mate.
That means a lot. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay.